Thanks. Good morning. As was mentioned, I got my master's and PhD here at Cal. I spent more of my time over that way, I think. Corey Hall and Soda Hall in EECS, so it's fun to be back on campus. This building didn't exist, and Haas looked totally different. But now I'm dating myself. Let's see. So I'm going to talk today for a bit about building a product-led growth strategy. It's my preference to keep it more interactive, so feel free to raise your hand or butt in with either a question or a comment or clarification. It just goes better that way. Otherwise, you're listening to me speak for a while. A little bit more about me. I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. I went to University of Arizona. As an undergrad, I was lucky enough to work on the first Mars rover project as an undergrad. Came out here to really escape the heat, I guess, and see what the Bay Area was all about. So, and then 6 years later, I graduated with a master's and PhD in EECS here at Cal. Kind of bounced around a little bit, went to a couple startups, and then for the past 10 years or so professionally, I've been at 3 companies. 6 years at Marin Software. When I joined there, they're a software as a service for online advertising management. When I joined there, we were about 30 people, doing about a little less than probably $1 million in revenue. 6 years later, $80 million in revenue, 500 people. We had gone public. Then decided to join the folks over at Zendesk. Kind of similar, but later trajectory, or later in their journey. We were about 400 people, maybe doing about $80 million in revenue. Not quite 4 years later, kind of 5x'd both of those. It was a crazy ride. Also was lucky enough to participate in their IPO. Let's see. For the past 8 months, I've been at a True Ventures portfolio company, ProsperWorks. It's a CRM that's really built for the relationship era. It's tightly integrated with G Suite. And it's a really seamless way to interact with CRM and Salesforce automation. So there I'm heading up growth. A little bit on the personal side, I like to eat in uni avocado toast, amazing. And I like to drink wine. Let's see. So this means a lot. The term product-led growth might mean nothing, might mean a lot of things. It probably means something different to many of you. But first, I would like to, now that I've given a little bit about myself, I wanted to take a quick poll or two to just get an idea of the audience. So who here is working at a company that's where the product or service is primarily targeted for consumers, like a B2C type environment? Great. And what about towards businesses? Awesome. Second question, who identifies more with, as a functional role on the product or development side? What about marketing? Sales? Some combination of the 3 that I mentioned, but you didn't raise your hand already. And E, none of the above. Cool. Thanks. All right. You'll see why I asked, but very helpful. Before I kind of get into a lot of the meat of this, my view on product-led growth. There's a whole class of companies that have been successful, kind of employing some version or some notion of this strategy. From a personal perspective, I do believe it's one of the futures of software as a service, or the software industry in general. To kind of get an idea of what it is, a lot of terms have been kicked around. You may have heard some of these, may have not heard some of these. I've heard it called mass enterprise. I've heard it called freemium, consumerization of the enterprise or consumerization of IT, growth hacking, high velocity sales. I feel like some of these are components of it. Some of these maybe missed the mark, hit the mark, but I think more generally, there's no real set playbook for what this is, and I think what the fact that it comes across this way as many different terms, and some of these kind of hit it, some of them maybe don't, is really evidence that basically the playbooks are being built right now. If you want to do a kind of a higher end enterprise software company, meaning you're targeting $100,000, $1 million or more annual contract value deals, there's playbooks around that. There's a lot of successful not only companies that have done it, but the methods they use are not exactly the same, but there's sort of a tried and true method there. If you want to do, say, target much lower in the market or go after consumers, there isn't really like here's the path you follow. And I think the fact that you see a lot of these terms being thrown around, a lot of different paths to success, a lot of different paths to failure, is really evidence that like this playbook is basically being built now. So I'm just going to give you my take on it, one person's opinion. And I'm specifically going to talk about B2B. I do think a lot of things kind of cross over into consumer. But almost my entire professional experience has been in B2B, so I don't really have a whole lot of credibility talking about consumer from the business side, but I do think a lot of things do apply. I've seen two, so in that transactional or that not necessarily the super high end of enterprise software, there's two really common models that I see out there. One kind of more on the left, I would classify as more of an e-commerce style, this idea of like, oh, it's kind of like buying a book on Amazon or buying a t-shirt. There's no real human touch or very limited human touch with the customers. The emphasis is very much on self-service, a lot more focus on product and marketing. And in general, the deal sizes tend to be smaller. Not always, but that type of approach kind of lends itself to a smaller deal size. On the other side, this is kind of taking more of a traditional kind of what I would call a sales-led approach to go to market on the software side, except they're kind of trying to strip back some of the components of it, right? So it's like you might still have multiple touch points with salespeople, so like sales development reps or account executives or account managers. It's still pretty heavily sales-led, whether it's in terms of planning or in resourcing or resource allocation. And typically, though, because of a lot of this like heavy touch, you do tend to need larger deals to really justify the cost of all these touch points. So with that as kind of a backdrop, my view of product-led growth is what if you could combine the best of both of these approaches? We're not saying like, hey, it's all 100% self-service and customers will buy software entirely on their own. And we're also not saying actually to buy software, you have to talk to a salesperson or you have to talk to a sales development rep and get in touch with us. You can't actually see the product or touch it or try it on your own. So my view of this is there's an approach that actually combines the best of both. And that's what I think of as, and I'm calling that product-led growth on purpose, but we'll talk about what I see as the primary components of that. Make sense? The sort of key elements, and this is sort of the outline basically for the rest of the talk. I think you guys have the slides also in front. There's four main areas that I see and that I'm going to touch on. There's a lot more. You could classify some of the other. My view is it's four main things. It's product, marketing, sales, and then one that tends to get overlooked quite a bit is packaging and pricing. And so I'll spend probably about 10 minutes or so on kind of each of these and what I see their role is in a product-led growth strategy. One thing I thought that would be helpful, we're all a product of our own experiences and what we've done, what we've seen work, what we've seen fail. So I'm just going to give you a quick download of my principles in hope that you understand sort of where this is coming from and how I approach the world. Again, take it for what it's worth as one person's opinion, but just a quick like, hey, here's what I go back to when I'm either confused about something or trying to figure out a problem or facing a challenge. This is probably a little controversial. I'll say it anyway because I really believe it. Product is greater than marketing, is greater than sales. And I'm going to say that very specific, like the context on this is it's typically a lot more effective. If you're going to build a product, there are some, I don't want to say it's easy, but if you want to go reach 100,000, 10,000, 100,000, a million people, to have a product support that is a lot easier than having, say, marketing go try to reach that many people, which is a lot easier than, say, sales trying to reach that many people. And that's where I'm coming from. So when I think of scale, which is, the last 10 years of my life has been spent in really fast scaling environments and growing environments, that's what I think about. That's not to say that you only do product or you only do marketing. Because I also said there's still 4 main elements of a product-led growth strategy, and these 3 are all involved. But where possible, where can you shift more that direction? So what, for example, is happening, say, manually or semi-manually with sales that can be shifted over into marketing, or further, even shifted over, stuff that's happening in marketing that can be shifted over into product. That's something like I will always think about. Here's another one. There's a lot of, especially over the last, call it 5 to 7 years, maybe 10 years, there's a lot of, whether it's blog posts, seminars, maybe environments like this of like, hey, we tested this and we got like 79% lift on sign up page and we decreased our monetization 26%, and you kind of listen to that and you're like, oh man, like I should go do that. And like the reality is like everybody's environment is totally different. Everybody, from the customer you're trying to attract, from the power of your brand to how your product works, et cetera. These are all great to learn what other folks are doing. One thing for me in particular is I'm a base principles person, so I will always try to build up from base principles. What is that? What exactly is our customer trying to do, or who we are, our prospect trying to do? Who are we attracting? How do we get them to the next step? Oh yeah, that was successful here, but like how much does that apply? So I will always build up from base principles. Not that I don't want to hear about what others are doing. I have no idea if that's gonna relate to what I'm doing. So. Test almost everything. And I almost had dropped the almost in there and said just test everything. I had one glaring exception to it, and I'll cover that as well. Cool. Let's go into product. Many of you, maybe all of you, I don't know, have some sort of a free trial or offering that folks can kind of use, whether it's a product, a service, or something they can take a look at. With more departmental buyers, end users being able to, in companies at least, as well as end consumers, making their own decisions on what they want to use, what they want to purchase. Customers effectively to be able to try your product for free, which is really cool. The good news is that like free is a super strong call to action. Like this is an example of, for example, a product strategy that is helping something that like marketing would eventually do. Right? Like, or maybe historically marketing would have done, right? Which is like to be able to attract folks. This idea of like free trial and the fact that people can use that product gives you like some, it's a great call to action. It's free. Like who doesn't want free? The caution on that is sometimes it's far too strong of a call to action, because who doesn't want free? And you've now opened up your funnel to a fair number of probably unqualified leads, maybe tire kickers, maybe folks who are way early in the funnel. Maybe they're like, God, I thought this was something else. But whatever, it's free. Like I might as well try it. It's like no cost to me. So something to definitely keep in mind as you're thinking about the product experience in general. That it's not like everybody coming in is like super qualified and is ready to go and get started to use that product. They're not necessarily that ideal customer. There are, that I happen to use an example from Zendesk just because it's familiar. For example, at Zendesk, we scored out probably in the range of 40% of our trial starts. Like they didn't even hit the marketing qualified stage. They were basically raw leads. They got on some automated drip campaign and email, and nobody ever talked to them. And the majority, 90+% of them, did not purchase, didn't do anything. A close cousin to free trial is freemium, and I'm not gonna put out a position on freemium. It is another approach. Back to the question of like, hey, what can something product do that maybe say marketing traditionally could have done? Freemium is a whole other one, right? You just get to use the service or product for free up until a certain, typically it's some sort of gate. I don't have a view that's like, oh, everybody should go freemium or nobody should go freemium. What I will say is it's not a tactic. It's a strategy. Like it's a way of life. If you're going to go freemium, you are now opening up your product or service, your offering, to a whole set of people who are using your product. They have strong opinions about what your product should do or not do. And they're not paying, most of them are not paying you a nickel. Dropbox, some of the best, one of the best in terms of monetizing a freemium kind of model. I think it was in their S1. It was like, what is their conversion rate to paid? It's like 2 to 2.5%. So you've got 97, 90, even like the ones who are doing it the best have 98% of their users not paying them a nickel. So how you approach that from a product perspective, from a development perspective, from a scale perspective, et cetera, it's totally different. I have been, and part of the reason I sort of bring this up is as the counter to this. I've definitely been in places where it's like, man, where we had a free trial, and I was like, yeah, we really need to get like more people. We need to open up that top of funnel, and it's always been thrown out there. I know, let's go freemium as like a tactic to just kind of get there, as if it was like, oh, an app store listing or something to just get some traffic. It's not. It cuts through completely the way you develop product, the way you go to market, from my view. The other one, another one on the product side is self-service all the things. Approach the product as if the end user couldn't talk to anyone. Like no one. They had to figure it out all on their own. And let's say even if that is like crazy unrealistic, because whatever you're doing is like really complicated, it has to integrate with something, it has to do whatever, it requires the end user and somebody else to go do blah, 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 blah. Just if you approach it that way and think about it from a product, from a development perspective, from a messaging perspective, copy, you'll just get a lot further. As opposed to thinking about like, oh, it's okay, like there's a sales engineer or a solution consultant who can come talk to the customer at this stage and then help them through it. You might have to do that anyway, but let's say you nail this from like a self-service perspective. In the best case, customers could like buy it on their own. Like this is even all the way through to purchase, through expansion, through whatever. In the best case, and maybe you only get a few customers who do that, or a really small percentage of your paying customers who really do that. But that's amazing. That's great. That gets you really close to very low acquisition cost. You're just like money is coming in. Let's say you don't quite get there. It's all right. Customers still got a lot further down the funnel, and you actually know where they're getting stuck. You know then where to invest your sales resources, your marketing resources, account management, any sort of human touch that you need to do. And customers are a lot more educated, so your conversion rates are going to be these folks are going to be a lot more successful. These programs are going to be a lot more successful because customers are much further down the funnel, down the path, down that path to purchase. So I would, this is another one where I've seen real, again, places I've been, Zendesk, killer example of this. I would argue that they were relatively early in that whole trend. I think they were one of the leaders in that trend from a timing perspective. Many other companies have really followed. Atlassian obviously has done a great job. There's a bunch of others in this case, and I think many of them may have even swung a little too far and maybe not had sales as part of that equation, and many of them are adding those touch points now, but they know where to invest. We had our sales capacity and account management capacity and whatnot for the customers that came in off of free trial at Zendesk. Some of those productivity rates were among the highest I had seen in the industry because we knew where to focus them. We focused them on trialers, customers who are really engaged in the product, who were, basically had a much higher propensity to convert, who we had ideas who we could upsell. And so we knew where to invest those resources as opposed to having to invest them much, much higher up in the funnel where we may not know. The other thing from the next couple slides here, you're going to see a common theme, but really focus on those first few minutes of the experience, and that sounds really maybe too narrow. Is you think about the concept of a free trial, who may be using the system. Typically, these tend to be very end user focused. It starts to look a lot like consumer, like the last time you downloaded an app on your phone that was kind of foreign to you, or you hadn't used it before. How much time did you really spend on it? Whether it was a game or whether it was something else. You got a couple minutes, you're like, I figured it out. Nah, I didn't. Delete, or it just ends up on page 3 of your phone. Business B2B software is not all that different, especially in a free trial kind of model. Traditionally, it would, if you bought business software before, it tends to be more of this like, okay, put some effort in. Okay, tell me about your requirements. Okay, now we just need to set up some integration, and then we need to plug this data in, and then we'll see that. Maybe that was assisted by a person, maybe it wasn't. Often probably required the vendor to do a lot of work, but it also required the customer to do a lot of work, which means it had to be like a real priority for them, and it took a lot of work before you actually saw a lot of value out of it. It's like you had to put in this investment, you had to make the case, you had to convince other people in the company. I would argue you can still get folks to put in a lot of effort into your product. It just has to be sequenced differently. You have to show them some value right away, something that they didn't know about, or something that got them like that. Oh wow, hey, that's cool. Oh, that's exactly what I want to do. Even if it wasn't like the end goal of what the software needed to do. But then you earn the right for them to say like, okay, now I'll invest a little more time. Now I'll invite another customer or somebody else on my team or whatever it might be. Corollary, or on a related note, Obsess server the sign-up flow. I've seen a lot of products where it's like the end product might be great, but just getting started, just that like, what does that sign-up flow look like? This is literally it's purposely half blurry. The slide is, when I was 3 weeks on the job at ProsperWorks, this was one of the first things I did was just make sure A, everything was instrumented to measure, and then B, like I went through that sign. I asked our QA folks, can I have some test accounts? And I just went through this flow like 15 times to just understand it, and then make sure it was measured. We measure this stuff religiously and understand like anything. What's a case that's like, let's look at all of the copy. Let's look, like, it doesn't even have to be like all user experience, like, like what does the button do or any of the, there's like a bunch of traditional stuff. But then think about the easy stuff too, is just like, what does it say? Users probably won't read it anyway, but for the ones who do, it can help a lot. And then you'll see this as this is a case definitely, this is a great spot to just do a lot of testing. This is going to be kind of near almost at the very near the top of your funnel. Your marketing website probably gets more than this. Will get more than this for sure. And so it's a great place to do testing, but this is another one where, it's just ripe for testing. You got them to sign up. Now, what about starting to get a little bit of value out of it? Just sign up means like, okay, they got through. They're dropped into your product. What happens now? One of the ways I think about this is, what are the habits that you're trying to form with your customer? How do you get them to start, what do you want them to do, either in the general with their own business, using your product or service, or with your product or service? Really think about those habits. How successful are you in forming your habits? This is another place where measurement's critical. With tools, for example, we use a tool called Pendo. There's definitely a lot of other ones, Chameleon, WalkMe, there's others. You can do a lot of fun things with onboarding without developers or with less developer impact, so you can kind of test. So at ProsperWorks, for example, we have a product manager and a designer who basically run our Pendo instance, and that kind of does, whether it's things like this, where it's kind of pointing out different areas in the app, or more of a LinkedIn kind of style, like progress bar of like, okay, do this, now do this, now do this. We can measure fall off in there. We can measure what's the propensity to second session, come back for a second session, to convert to paid customer. Again, this is an area where you get a lot of data points, hopefully, because this is much earlier in your funnel, and you can do a lot of testing on this stuff. One of the examples more recently in the orange call out there is we were, after literally our first implementation of using Pendo as an onboarding tool, we were able to double conversion rates to paid for the users who were engaged in the product. So this stuff can, like, as just an example of like, and it all depends on like what you're trying to do and what customers are doing today. But it was an area where we're a CRM, so it's not the easiest thing to do, but yeah.
Quick question. So how did you guys define engaged users early on?
So we've used a couple different measures in the past. One is literally in the trial, have they come back for a second session? One has been we define this kind of notion of golden motions, this idea of those couple actions that they take in the application with a much higher propensity to, where they have a much higher propensity to convert. How do we get more customers? So those people who did those golden motions, or 2 out of 3, were considered engaged. In past companies, we've literally done something really as simple as count the number of clicks a trialer took in the application, and then bucketed them and gave them a score 1 to 5. 4 and 5 were engaged. You can go super complicated on it. You can. I would opt for initially going much simpler, and then evolving that over time. Virality. This is another area where I think there was a question earlier about what could something that's traditionally, say, done in marketing, but could also be done, or could be done in product, or how would you shift something? This is another one. This totally depends on, it's not necessarily for everyone. Slack, everybody likes to use Slack as saying, oh, everybody could be viral, and like, I'll just tell you right now, sadly, your product is not like Slack. I wish you all the success in the world, but they are quite special. But there's a lot of other ways, even if you can't achieve, or your product doesn't necessarily, say, lend itself to massive collaboration, or the core of your product isn't collaborative, or collaboration feels like it would be bolted on if you were to just try to put it on just for this sake. A lot of other ways you can achieve virality. Powered by links, if you're ever kind of posting something, or end users are posting something or putting something out there publicly. I don't know if you guys have ever used Typeform. They're a great example of this. They've kind of combined a few of these components, right? They're freemium. They do have, everything has this powered by Typeform on it. Zendesk, as an example, you were able to create a help center, or like basically that had a lot of your questions in it, and that by default that said powered by Zendesk. If you host mapped it and put it on another domain, the amount of SEO juice we got from that was pretty incredible. It actually got us a number of leads too, but I will say they're not the highest quality. So it sounds great to do. I would argue that it's more exposure and branding and other things. You may get some leads out of it. You may get some exposure. Similarly, the Zendesk chat product also had a powered by Zendesk on it, which got us a bunch of great exposure. But, other ones, there's other more like traditional means that I think tend to get forgotten about. Asking your customers, literally like after some sort of success event, or after they've been on the platform for a while, so referrals. The other one, is there's a lot more research done by buyers and prospects beforehand, boosting your reviews and review sites, whether it's like a mobile app store or something like a G2 Crowd if you're in the B2B space. Really prompting those. Most of those reviews don't just come from just random customers. They were definitely prompted. So you might as well get in on that too. You can get a lot more sophisticated on some of this stuff too, so you're not just asking all of your customers to go out there, but the ones who either give you a higher NPS score, or the ones who just renewed, or the ones who just purchased annually, or bought or upgraded, so there's signals you can use of which audience to really run these types of campaigns against. Okay, so that was a lot heavier product side. You'll see some of these kind of like blur the lines a little bit, and that is kind of the point, actually. But let's shift gears to the marketing side. Calls to action. There's a lot on this slide. I didn't really feel like doing the animation. You probably have no idea who that guy is up there. His name is Peter. He was my boss. He's a good friend of mine. If anybody who wants any help like doing sales training or anything like that, he's amazing. He came to me at some point. I worked with him at Marin Software. He was the chief revenue officer, and at some point he's like, you keep talking about like free trials, and like you want to like have people try our product. And Marin was a very enterprise product in that it was like our average deal size was like $100,000 a year. We didn't have a free trial, and I started up more of our mid-market business. And he's like, yeah, I don't get it. Like, who likes to try software? He's like, that sounds like a total pain in the ass. And I said, well, how would you buy software then? And he's like, I don't know, like I have a couple things that I need to know. Show me a demo, does it meet those requirements? And give me testimonials from 3 customers like me. And give me 2 references that I can call. That's it. It's like trying software for me is like, it's work, it's effort. I don't want to see if it goes and like, works for me. I just want to, I need more confidence than that because I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. And it was really eye-opening to me because I was like on the exact opposite end of the spectrum, which is like, just let me try it. I don't want to talk to a salesperson. I don't want to talk to a sales engineer. I don't want to fill out your form. I just really want to try the software. But what it did get me thinking about is not everyone's like Peter and not everybody's like me. There's a whole mix. And again, if you're like a lot of product-led or like more back to that earlier slide, like the sort of self-service style, which is like, just try it. Like, you don't need to talk to anybody. In fact, I'm not going to let you talk to anybody. Really got me thinking about like, hey, why, like, what about trying a mix of these calls to action? And, so I would really encourage, if you don't have it already, if it's anything like this applies to you, to try something out about a demo request. Request a demo, it could either be a recorded video, it could be a webinar. You don't have to do it all one-to-one. You don't have to, so the cost isn't so high. But there's some people who are just way earlier up funnel, and they're like, I don't really want to go invest. Like, trial to them means, God, I got to go spend 2 hours of my life like clicking around some software and see if it's setting it up for me. So examples, like, I think it's really interesting, something like Zoom is like, yeah, there's a lot of like free trial, but at the top you've got request a demo. Atlassian goes even further, which is they probably have enough brand equity and end users and people who have moved from company to company, which is like, don't try it, just buy it now. It's worth trying. Probably better for them. Definitely at ProsperWorks, we do both. We see a healthy split between the two. I remember at Zendesk when the Zendesk website used to all be about funneling towards the trial. That was like everything just had to do with the trial, and we decided on some pages we would try this request a demo. It was really controversial at the time because it was like, oh my God, what's going to happen to trials? Yeah.
I noticed that your request a demo, right, is in a sense, your primary call to action with the button being highlighted. Is that because you guys have found out that the demo converts faster than the free trial? Like, what was that choice there?
For this one, so I don't remember exactly, and I don't even know if this is what it looks like right now. I will say a lot of the other pages have more of the free trial call to action. This one's on the home page in specific. I wouldn't say that demos necessarily, in my experience, convert faster. One, they tend to convert at a higher rate. And 2, they tend to be larger deal sizes. And that was the same, that was a very similar result that we saw at Zendesk. At Zendesk, we saw our demo pipeline, I think soon before I left. Yeah, our demo pipeline got to almost the same level as our trial pipeline, which is crazy because we do a lot of trials a month. But they were definitely larger deal sizes. Email. A lot's been talked about email. Emails are hard. It's a discipline. There's way too many. Everybody gets way too many emails. Nobody reads them. It's still possible to get really good open rates and click-through rates and see people actually engage. I do believe a lot of it is about what I call personalization at scale. Not just some blanket email that everybody starting your trial or everybody using your service or is on your list gets. What did they do? What didn't they do? Beyond, I would think more beyond personas. I like to use, depending on how much information you have about folks on your list, I would really think about kind of the idea of jobs to be done as a framework if you're not familiar with it. That to me is much broader in a way and more actionable. There's a lot of great email tools, but I would really think about like how do you do certain types of like personalization and timing. But it is still possible. Email's not the only way. You just can't rely on it 100%, as everybody knows. But you can still get pretty far. I put this in marketing because I'm not sure really where it belonged, but I see most of it going into marketing. But democratizing product usage data. So if you do have a trial or a freemium or interaction, a lot of what I've seen, to be able to drive some of these like personalization at scale, as an example, with your marketing automation product, one of the components you'd really want is product usage. And it's not necessarily the easiest thing to get. There's different ways of doing it. There's like there's tools like Heap or Mixpanel or whatever to get you kind of clickstream, Google Analytics to get you clickstream data. There's other ones, depending on your product, you have like this core product database that has all this information. What I'd want is invest the resources to really make that accessible. But two, I would really then think about this other second point, which is make it digestible. I've seen a lot where it's like, well, they clicked here, and then they clicked here, and then they clicked here. I'm not really sure what they did. I'm not really sure that path they took. Did they create a lead in the system? Did they take a core action? They might have done that from the mobile device. They might have done it from your extension. They might have done it whatever, lots of different ways. So really think about how to reduce that down into meaningful actions. We at ProsperWorks call them golden motions. And then be able to spit that reduction kind of out to different places. Marketing automation, analytics, getting that democratized, exposed to lots of people in the organization, making that an organizational thing, I think is huge. You'll get a lot further insight from other people in the company once they start engaging with it and they can interact with it. And then the CRM, if you got sales folks. Let's see. I'm going to speed up a little bit. Customer marketing. We've talked a lot of what I've talked about so far has been very much on the acquisition front. Yeah.
Hey, when you get a minute, I'm just curious more on how you arrived at what the golden motions were, the process you used, and how big was your sample size, and what was your subset that you. So if you could just talk a little bit about that. And it doesn't have to be now.
Yeah. No, I'll cover it now because I think it's a really good question. Let's see. I've done this in a few different places, and at ProsperWorks in particular, there was some research done before I got there, but I can kind of talk through sort of a little bit about what that's like. It really starts with you can go a couple ways, I would say, to like pare down the whole space, because you could literally take like every click in the application or every single action they could take, is have it be a little more informed and have maybe a set of. You could even start as small as like 10. You could go up to like 50 of like actions that customers may have taken that you think are correlated to, let's take on the acquisition front, higher conversion to paid, let's say, if that's your metric, or 30-day active user or whatever your end or midpoint kind of goal is. You can then run basically collect enough data to do a regression analysis. And my guess is you will find that there's a couple that just lead to whatever, like not always the case. You may find a couple clusters, in which case you might have totally different like use cases that you're tackling. So I'd keep it open to that. There's probably a lot more advanced techniques of like throwing it all into some, like machine learning system and have something kind of pop out. I would go in with like a gut as a start to validate. And then once you've got something there, then you can then you can iterate that over time. The cool thing is, and at least a couple companies I've done this, is that those golden motions, they don't tend to change as much as you think. So that like one-time investment or that investment in kind of calculating a bunch of that stuff actually is then can be useful for several months, if not quarters, years.
What were the golden motions at Zendesk?
Connecting your email. I don't know if you guys are all familiar with Zendesk, but connecting your email into the support ticketing platform, integrating it with one or two other systems. We had a bunch of sort of plug-and-play integrations. Those were the two that I remember. I'm pretty sure there were a couple others, but yeah. Customer marketing. I think the main message here is a lot of what we've been talking about acquisition works for customers too, and it's easy to forget that like, oh, hey, they're an audience also. And in fact, they're an audience we know a lot more about because we know what they're paying us. We know how they're using the platform. We probably know much more about them. As an example, at Zendesk, I helped spin up a bunch more customer marketing and campaigns, and we were able to really drive expansion rates by just treating them as an audience and doing a lot of the same kinds of things that we were doing on the acquisition side. But marketing tends to be very acquisition focused. Sales. So why are we talking about sales? There were a few people who raised their hand who said they were in sales, one. But two, I do think it's actually a critical component of a product-led growth strategy, which is that, again, end users on their own are just not gonna like go there and buy. They do need help. They do need, and sometimes they're like my friend Peter, who doesn't actually want to try software at all and would rather talk to someone. That doesn't mean he's any less qualified or any less serious. It just means the product's probably not going to be able to help him get to where he wants to go. There's a lot of words on this slide. You guys have it as reference. This is actually literally a slide. So a little bit about what I call velocity sales. It's been called a few different things. I ran this team at Zendesk, and that's where I really learned a lot of this. I won't say I can take credit for the model. I can take credit for scaling it a lot. But I got a chance to work with Matt Van Loan. He was the first sales rep hired at Zendesk, and I worked closely with him soon after I joined, and I sort of inherited this team. It was called one-to-many sales before, and I went and hung out with him, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, well, basically we have all these trialers, and we just invite them to webinars, and like we just kind of answer their questions, whatever they have about the product." And he said sometimes they write back and they ask us questions. I was like, oh, well, how about we like scale that in a way? Like, why? I'm like, one, when I look at your calendar and your day, there's not that much one-to-many going on. There's a lot of one-to-one. I mean, but they're really short and they're really driven by like other channels. So I'm like, how about we change the name on this and let's call it velocity? But the ethos kind of stayed the same and the philosophy stayed the same. So I run the same team, or a very similar team at ProsperWorks, and have started up this motion. But it's really about, I think of it as more of like an advocacy model, or a get customers, they're still very product driven, get them education so that they can use your product to do what they're trying to do. And if you do that in the trial period or in that early period, they will buy. And that's really the approach. I would say, from those of you who may have worked in, say, traditional sales organizations, one thing that's very different about this kind of type of organization is they're also involved in all of the like marketing testing and product testing that we're doing. So we may change stuff around all the time. They may get different messages. There's a lot more automation. And so scaling is a key, this last bullet here, of like how to do it at scale. Their goal is not just like hit the quota, but it's also like, how do we even do more? How do we take on more? It's not about, I've had different, whether it's chief revenue officers or heads of sales or CEOs, be like, come to me like, okay, great, so I want to give you a lot more people. And I'm like, yeah, I don't really want more people. Like, I want to go figure out how we can, like, I'll tell you when we run out of time in the day and we need more people, but it's not like I just want more people. Leverage automation, again, some of this probably belong kind of some in the marketing side, but as an example of like a trial flow that we ran earlier at ProsperWorks, we've automated basically all of the outreach throughout the trial. The only one piece that's not automated and where sales are really calling into are making touches, are calls. A lot of but they're only calling the ones who are really engaged in the product, because I know more about what they're doing. So if they came back for a second session, if they did some of these golden motions, those are the ones they're actually trying to reach out to, not anybody else. For the emails that are going out, some of the emails go out on behalf of the sales reps themselves. Some of them go out on behalf of like a generic address, like hello@ProsperWorks or something like that. And the call to action is usually schedule a meeting. We leverage a tool like Calendly to come and schedule meetings. So when we first kicked this off, there were some people who were kind of skeptical. At ProsperWorks, I had one rep. In his first week, he had 27 meetings that were just generated by just kicking something like this off. These were literally people who were just like, great, I want to schedule a time. They had a choice, 15 minutes or 30 minutes. 15 minutes was like, quick question about the product. 30 minutes was like, hey, I want to see a demo and understand exactly how it works for me. In fact, Scott had to schedule a do not schedule for lunch there so he could go to the bathroom and eat lunch. But we use this at scale, and this is a great way of, this is sort of blurring the lines of like, okay, what does sales traditionally do? How can we push some of that into marketing? But it's much more of a partnership, and you couldn't do it without a sales rep necessarily. You could call it some other type of role if you wanted. But operationally, So I've run sales ops and biz ops in a former life. This is a little bit of a call out to that. If you happen to be in an organization where you have traditional sales and you're trying to do this, or you're trying to build this up, it's not necessarily a traditional, quote, sales ops type of thing. Think about it much more as capacity driven. Like I think I kind of alluded to this. It's basically you only really need to add reps when they're running out of hours in the day. Because they're primarily, in our case, for example, they're fed off of inbound leads. So I would rather go invest more in trying to get more inbound funnel to then service them than I would salespeople. Again, unless they're like people can't book a meeting with them, that week or something like that, or their calendar's totally full. But that's really easy to tell operationally. Pipelines and stuff like that, like keep it simple. They're not having a ton of interaction with every prospect along the way. This was kind of lessons learned from a couple companies. Keep it really simple, just basic. You just want to track progress. You don't need to. Your pipeline is not going to be your key metric of like forecasting. You're going to think much more about a funnel, right? You're going to look at like I have this many either marketing qualified leads or MQLs or PQLs. Okay, I know how long, like what's the profile of when those convert in time. So I'm looking at the pipeline, but not a ton. I'm primarily looking at these other three metrics here. Like for me, I use PQL a lot, product qualified leads. So those engaged in the product to win conversion rate, average deal size, and days to close, and what that distribution looks like. So it's a different kind of, it's not traditionally just go look in our CRM and you have this many in stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, therefore I can forecast X for this month or quarter. It's a lot. I actually look at it on a much more granular basis. I look at daily metrics, I look at weekly metrics. If I really could, I would put sales reps on a weekly quota. There's no like, oh, hey, we'll like make it up at the end of the month or end of the quarter. It's a lot more formulaic than that. Same thing, kind of common thread. All this applies to customers too. Again, a lot of what we've talked about is like whether you call them salespeople or product specialists or advocates. I ran the same team. We had a split team at Zendesk where we had account executives for new business, account managers for existing business. A lot of the same stuff applies. They just happen to be customers. You can use heavy automation. And drive you can not just only drive expansion, but you can also drive retention through these types of campaigns and people, because the same thing really applies both to end customers. Your customers may have changed. They might have grown. They might have been acquired another company. Who knows? Their whole outlook may have changed, and they still need help, and they may not be able to do it on their own. Packaging and pricing. This also applies to me too right now in my current setup, but you probably haven't thought about it enough. At Zendesk, I was lucky or unlucky enough to work on an 11-month pricing and packaging project. I own pricing and packaging at ProsperWorks as well. It's a huge lever that is, I won't say largely untapped, but I think it's the short end of the stick in terms of effort. This is me playing golf in Hawaii. It's an amazing swing. For those of you who play golf, there's an adage, drive for show, putt for dough. The point being, everybody all the golf technology and golf balls and golfers all focus on trying to hit like a 300-yard drive right down the middle. The reality is half of their strokes on their scorecard are putts, which is kind of boring and simple, but that's like the people who putt well and have a really good short game have much better scoring than the people who can hit the ball 300 yards down the middle. This is my view on pricing and packaging. I do think you need them both, and you need to focus on them both, but there's a lot of like, oh man, $69. Like, who's gonna pay $69? Our competitors don't do this, and like, customers can't afford this, and like, that's blah, 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 blah. But if you're not talking about like $69 for what, it kind of is meaningless. And so everyone likes to attach, it's easy to talk about the number, but it's a lot harder to talk about the package, but the package has a lot more. If you get packaging right, figuring out the appropriate price is a lot easier. Just trying to figure out the price in isolation is, or near isolation. I see that happening a lot. Tends to happen a lot, particularly with, not to pick on them, but salespeople and marketers, because they're used to those kind of conversations with customers, but focus on packaging. This is my one exception to test everything. it's really hard to test. Just because it cuts across everything. For those of you who have owned pricing and packaging before or are owning it now, you'll realize everybody's got an opinion. Most of them are strong opinions, weakly held. But point is, it touches everything. It touches finance, it touches marketing, it touches product, it touches sales, it touches the customers. If you have salespeople, in addition to the whole process, then like the customer experience could be really poor if you're testing something or they just log in at home and they see the price is $49 and they log in at work and they see the price is $69. Like, wait, which one? Like the last thing you want to do in this whole process is erode trust. I would advocate more for doing a lot more homework up front before rolling something out, but then also be agile about it and have a process where you can iterate often, which can be hard because it touches so many things in the organization. But so it's not like, oh, we're going to make this one decision and then never revisit it again. You're going to make a pretty informed decision and go with it, as opposed to, I don't know, let's test it. There's an approach to packaging. You may have heard about it with like the concept of like leaders, fillers, and killers. Who's heard of that? Okay. Leaders are, and I've used a really common example, McDonald's. Leaders are, where you have high value and high adoption. That's what, if you look at the value meals at McDonald's, they tend to prominently focus on whether it's the Big Mac or chicken nuggets or the veggie burger or the salad or whatever is the bigger part of that. That's the leader. There's other stuff in there, and those are fine. Those are like, they have high adoption, but the value's not that high. It's relatively commodity, like fries and a Coke or a drink. And then there's killers where they may have high value for some people, but the adoption's relatively low. And so because the adoption's relatively low, those who don't adopt, the value's so low that it actually devalues the package. So if I had a value meal with all 4 of these, and it costs $7.99, some of you would be like, I'm paying $1.50 for coffee. Like, I don't drink coffee, and I don't want it certainly after lunch or after this meal. Others would be like, hey, that's great, because I was going to buy a coffee anyway, and a coffee's $3, and now it's like all in there, and so I'm not really paying that much, and so it becomes this very polarizing thing. So a couple notes on this. Figure out what they are, what your leaders, fillers, and killers are. I would plan segment if you have multiple plans, like good, better, best pricing, or silver, gold, whatever pricing. The leaders are where you plan segment on, like those are your anchors. Your fillers, I don't want to say they can be whatever, but in general, people are a little less sensitive to it. It may be a little more commodity. And at this stage, depending on where you are, at a younger stage, I would even actually really question why you're even thinking about killers. If you have low adoption, then on these features, almost by definition, just because there's higher willingness to pay or higher value, later on, if you get to the size of like a Zendesk and you want to really think about this and you want to think about maybe the play is really you make this kind of like an add-on, or you have special editions for those certain people who are coffee lovers and now they have an edition they can buy, but the mass doesn't feel like they have to really buy into the coffee. Pricing and presentation. Now we're starting to think about pricing. Once you have some packages or draft packages, then you can really start to think about pricing. Presentation matters on pricing. This was another test we did at ProsperWorks. This is literally in the product itself. Just by changing copy around and the presentation of the plans, we didn't actually change the plans at all. Just by changing what it looked like, we were able to have a 50% lift in conversion rate, and we had more purchasers buy the higher plan because we showed them much more of the value of what they were getting in the product. That presentation matters, so it's not just about the packaging, but as you're thinking about it, with kind of getting your product marketing lens on, how you really present that to customers. All right, kind of near the end here, wrapping it up. Putting it all together, I know I went through a lot of stuff. I'm happy to talk through whatever, either as questions, later, whenever. Hopefully what you got out of it was it's a team sport. All of these are what are traditionally kind of very different disciplines where you have product management and development, you have your marketing team, you have salespeople, and then you have packaging, which may live in any one of those or in a separate group altogether. It really requires the coordination of all of those. And and I'm living that right now. I'm lucky enough to have basically had a chance. John Lee, the CEO of ProsperWorks, when he was recruiting me, said, "Hey, what would it take to bring you on board?" And I said, "I want all these." And he said, "Okay, we'll figure out how to make it work." And so I have a product dev team, I have access to marketers, I have a sales team. I actually didn't think as much about packaging 8 months ago, but on my first day on the job, he said, "Hey, by the way, growth includes packaging too, so you own packaging and pricing." So it did actually all come together for me, but it is a team sport. Not that you can't have it all in separate departments and have them communicate and coordinate, but having a way you can really tie it together is really what makes it powerful. So that's all I got. There's my email. Feel free to reach out. Happy to any questions, anything you want to discuss, anything. Like I said, a lot of this is will be very personal to your business and your setup and your stage. But I hope it was helpful. I think we have a couple minutes. Oh, okay. But I'm happy to hang out for a bit if folks have questions. Yeah?
Seems like you're doing a lot of things, and probably there's a lot of prioritization issues. How do you go about prioritizing what to do?
Yeah, so for everyone else, the question was, that looks like all the things. How do you prioritize? Really good question. And that is, someone asked me, what specifically keeps you up at night? Or what is your core challenge? And that is it. It's prioritization. And so I am constantly looking for ways to, not to prioritize, but how to realize that there's the most opportunity doing X. And that is, one comes from kind of an overall model of the business, like having metrics and dashboards that kind of go across, whether it's if you're a SaaS company, it'll be something like the pirate metrics. And having something where you can review that very, very regularly and say, oh, the pinch in our funnel or the pinch in our business is here. So let's go figure out what it takes to do that. At least that's one of the better ways. And then reviewing that with the team to see if there's other opinions on oh man, are there A, metrics we're not thinking about, or B, areas where there's differing opinions on where there's headroom to go. That's kind of how I've operated the team, but it's an ongoing challenge. I'd say it's probably the bigger challenge. Yeah.
How would you approach creating a trial experience that? So our product is a very heavy onboarding and experience. Typically, it's an enterprise deal, traditional sales cycle. Customer success will help onboard them. But in order to get them to experience value in a trial setting very early, the only way I can think of is having dummy sandbox data. Do you think that's a good way to approach a trial, or is it just sort of relevant to something?
It can be, if it gets people to the light bulb moment that's oh yeah, now I see what this can do. I've seen instances of dummy data where, because it's easier to do, right? The product can kind of you can just populate it with some dummy data. It's already there. In some cases, I've seen there's an analytics product that I remember would put dummy data in, and we would use that in demos, and people were yeah, but they were a retailer or an e-tailer. They'd be yeah, but we don't sell shoes. And they're but the data had some chart of how shoes are crushing it or something, and it was they just couldn't. They couldn't connect it because they were really looking for the insight in their own data. And so I think if you can get to that moment, great. If there's other ways are there simpler ways of getting some of the data in, which isn't the full end all be all state, but it's a file upload or or from a couple of common products that they're getting an export from, that might be a way to go also. Yeah.
I haven't fully formulated this question, so excuse me if it's messy, but a lot of growth seems to be a lot optimizing for the customer. You look at usage and you use the best metrics you have for customers that you're retaining to simulate that experience or that journey for customers that you're losing but would like to retain. So you're optimizing for the customers that you have and that you are retaining.
Yep.
You said something interesting in your presentation, though, about needing to know the ideal customer, the customer you want. How do you reconcile those two things? The fact that that your metrics are all about optimizing for the customer you have and the one that you happen to be retaining now, well, that might not be the customer you necessarily want.
Yeah. Let's see. Again, I think it gets, for me at least, it would get to like kind of what's the balance? Because I've seen the like, oh, optimize for the customer you have kind of go sort of overboard, right? If you take these golden motions that I was talking about and you're like, oh great, just get everybody to do the golden motions. And you're like, yeah, but it's unclear if like that is actually correlated to anything they want to do, right? Is it correlation or causation, right? Like, is it a profile of or is it a property of the types of leads that you're getting in who want to do that and they're doing it and therefore they're converting, versus the ones who they don't even want to do that and you just happen to like, and your product's really not made for them. So one school of thought is like, okay, well then maybe you shouldn't attract them anyway and try to get them out of the funnel, like way up front, like just ask the question up front, like what they're trying to do. I would really think about it as like really trying to also, I mean, it kind of goes hand in hand. It's not just straight up quantitative either. I think that's the other big call out here. And again, this is where we use our sales team quite a bit, is like, because they are having a lot of these conversations where if we have a theory or something, we'll be like, why don't we like go ask like all the trialers coming, like all the people you connect with in the next 2 weeks, you know, this question, like what are they trying to do? Or I have a suspicion that X, or we have a suspicion X, like let's go try to validate that up front before just sort of, I don't want to say blindly having the data just sort of tell you like, okay, just optimize for these customers. I don't know if that answers your question, but it's yeah, solid. Cool, I think we're just at time. I'm happy to hang out for a bit if other folks want to ask questions, but thanks.
Thank you.